Good morning. So I grew up on the banks of a sand river in southern Sudan. My parents were linguists, and they were taking a language that didn't have any written language yet, was only oral. It would take them about 10 to 15 years to start learning the language, creating an alphabet, teaching people how to read and write in their language, and ultimately for them translating it into the Bible. Now, the Toposa tribe had been using cattle as a form of money for years, for generations. And if you didn't have enough cattle, you would use goats. And if you didn't have enough goats, you would break it down into beads. And this is an example of beads where the white ones equal 20 head of cattle. So this person has 6 beads, 6 white beads, which means that they have 120 head of cattle. And you'd see people wearing around this public record of their cattle, which might be 3 or 4 of these together. So my parents had to build this metal house, and we didn't have any electricity. We used paraffin lanterns, and we used candles. We had to have our own pump, and we pumped our own water. And so it was in this framework that I grew up. And there's much of life today that we kind of forget about, right? So we're sitting here in beautiful Brazil in a nice big city, and we don't think about where our Wi-Fi is going to be up or down. We don't think about the electricity being on or off. And we definitely don't think about the hospital not being open because they don't have power. But that isn't true for so many people around the world. And so we as Bitcoiners, we understand that energy is what sets the value for Bitcoin, but it's also hard for us as Bitcoiners to sometimes remember that energy has a humanity of it all its own. So we think of Bitcoin being the base layer for finance in the future, but the world's most foundational commodity is actually energy. By virtue of the proof of work model, Bitcoin cannot be created or transacted without the expenditure of very large amounts of energy. So I ran the calculation this morning. If you're using a 24 joules per terahash Bitcoin mining machine, it'll take you 914 kilowatts of energy kilowatt hours of energy to make 1 Bitcoin. And to kind of give you an idea of what that means, that is one household in the US using this power, it'll take them 1 month to use that much energy. In Brazil, it's 5 months, and in Malawi, it's 30 months. So you can see that it's quite a bit of energy to make 1 Bitcoin. So the story of human progress is the story of energy. Energy is this base layer for human progress, and it doesn't matter where you are, but if you have it, your grades become better because you can study at night. Healthcare becomes more affordable and operational. Security gets better because you have lights, and productivity goes up. So if you can finally irrigate your farm, you can make more with what you have. There's this really fun show that it's called Bango's the Theory by the BBC, and they did one called the Human-Powered Home. And what they did is they put this experiment together where they put a small family into a home, 4 people, and they had next door 60 people on bicycles providing all the power. Now, as you can imagine, those guys are sweating all day long to just provide the power that home needed. And to give you some real concrete examples, because I can't show you the short video, is it took 24 cyclists to heat the oven and 11 cyclists to provide the energy just to make 2 slices of toast. So you can see energy is something that's hard to get, right? We sometimes overlook how hard and difficult it is to get access to energy. But as we saw yesterday, there's no such thing as a low energy rich country. And the truth of this is found in the numbers. So the United States, which sits up and to the right, uses 5.5 times more power than the whole African continent of 1.2 billion people. That's everybody down in the orange, or a lot of the ones in the orange. So that gives you an idea of scale of energy and what it means for human progress. Now, why am I telling you all this, right? It's because we still have the problem of 1.1 billion people today not having any electricity. Not that they can't afford it, but they don't have it at all. And in our continent, 600 million of them live without power, live without electricity, and so they don't have the same advantages as everybody else. Now, this isn't said so that you feel guilty about your life or me about my life. It's to underscore the scale of the problem that we're dealing with. So if we truly want to light the world, if we truly want to provide electricity, we have to understand why this happens. So you say, well, why not just build more energy in Africa? Well, there's a very simple answer. It's not a good investment. An average African will use 6 kilowatt hours per month. That's just not a lot of energy. It takes a lot of capital to build a new energy site. So if I built a new energy site and I want to get a return on that investment, I find that very difficult because what happens is I'm not making enough money from the power that I provide to the community to even cover my operational costs. But here's a trick. We actually don't use all our energy anywhere in the world. So this is a real graph from the village we operate our energy at in Malawi, and this is one in the UK. And what you can see is the areas that there's spikes in, there's a high need for energy, and we need to provide that much energy for those spikes. But the energy isn't being used all the time. An easier way to say this is there's pockets of wasted energy. In this case, you can clearly see where the Bitcoin mining can happen, right? And so this is the real-time demand response that Margot was speaking about. So I run a company called Gridless. At Gridless, we are in 3 countries, in Kenya, we're in Malawi, and we're in Zambia. And we use biomass, we use hydro, we use geothermal, we use solar, all renewable energy sources. And what we've come to find out is that there's a lot of stranded energy everywhere. And you can see that in this form, right? So if I build a new site, I'm only using 20% of the energy in the beginning, I'm only making a small amount of revenue, and the rest of that energy is wasted. When Gridless comes along, all of a sudden we can make use of that stranded energy, and we can provide a return to the independent power producer who has built that energy. And what does that mean in reality? It means that you might have a site that has been losing you money for years, and you finally make revenue. In this form, it's in Bitcoin. So let's bring it home. What does it actually look like? So this is one of the sites that we found in rural Zambia. And when I say by rural Zambia, I mean very rural Zambia. This is 10 hours from the closest airport, over dusty, bad roads. So they had built this site 15 plus years ago, and they had only ever used up to 35% of the power that was available from this river. This is the Zambezi River, one of the largest rivers in Africa. What happened was, we started to get into conversation with the owner, and we said, listen, you know, if we bring one 20-foot container, that can use 500 kilowatts of energy. And if we use that, then you can make the excess. So as we heard from Alex yesterday, is that at night the people sleep, but the river never sleeps. This is something that's well understood by the owners of energy sites. And he said, okay, well, let's take a look at that and let's see what we can do. He had built this 15 years ago, like I said, and he had about 5,000 customers, as well as some businesses. Those are like the mobile phone towers. It may be a grain mill. It could be a school. It could be a little duka, some stores. And it just couldn't, it was stagnant. It couldn't grow enough energy usage. So what does it look like when you put a Bitcoin mine in one of these locations? Well, it starts off with us designing and engineering and building the Bitcoin mining containers in Nairobi. This is our team. They're welding, they're putting in the cables, they're wiring up the power. We then load them onto the back of a truck. They go the 2,000 kilometers, in this case, to Zambia. We do internet connectivity, which of course, as you know, can be a challenge in some places. So we'll use Starlink, we'll use the mobile network. We bond those two services to make sure that we don't lose shares. And then we start racking machines. And it's a pretty simple process to just throw these on a shelf. We start making sure everything's controlled and working. That's me very unhappy because I had to re-network a bunch of the cables. And then by day 3, it's up and running. So there's nowhere to stay when you're in some of these locations, so we just camp out on the river. And it was interesting, the owner of the site was with us, the owner of the energy. And he looks at his phone. Well, first off, we turned the power on, and he finally hears the difference in the turbine, and he can see and he can hear how much energy is being used. And he goes, I've never heard my turbine being at full capacity before. It's only ever been at 35%, now it's at 100%. The next morning, he wakes up, and he looks at his phone, and he looks at his wallet, and he's like, I just made Bitcoin. It's like, yeah. And he was paid that day. And we said, you get paid every day. And he just kind of smiled, and he said, I've never been able to think strategically about my business before, and now I can think about expansion. In the year since we've been on this site, it's grown from those 5,000 people, those 5,000 homes, to about another 2,500 homes since that time. So they've been able to expand the network, decrease the cost of power, and provide more grid stability. Okay. That's all a setup for what I actually really want to talk about. Because what happened was I got into Bitcoin mining because I knew how to deploy infrastructure in Africa for connectivity. That's what I had done for the previous decade. But what happened was I started reading a lot about energy, and I couldn't understand why people weren't building more energy. So I read, I think it was about 15 or 17 different papers to understand what was going on. And then I wrote my own document to kind of synthesize everything. And the long and short of it is this. The major power grids of Africa are not going to go too much further than they already are, because they can't even get a return on investment for the heavy capital that they'll put into those places. So what they need to do is build more mini-grids. But mini-grids don't make enough money to be profitable. Right? We talked about this already. There's not enough users. If your user base, the main thing that they're going to do is turn on an LED light bulb and charge their phone, then you're not going to get enough usage to make a return on your investment. So anybody in their right mind would not invest in a mini-grid by itself. So what is a mini-grid? Just to give you an idea, this is a small independent power production site for hydro. We just take the energy. The river goes, the water comes into the forebay and then goes back into the river further down after it's gone through the turbine, and it powers everything. The World Bank estimates that we need about 140,000 mini-grids by 2030 to fully electrify Africa. There's only 5,000 on the continent today. That means you need to build over 20,000 new mini-grids every year to get there, which just frankly cannot and will not happen. At least if we use the same model we've been using to today. So what became very clear to us at Gridless was that we've been solving for the symptom, right? We've been finding stranded power and making that life easier for the independent power producer who is there, as well as the community. But we weren't solving for the disease. We weren't curing the disease that was really about financing new energy. So, as I said before, you saw this other Sankey chart. It's like there's already this current model of energies that's being built near communities, but Africa has over 400 gigawatts of just hydro available on the continent, which is, to give you context, all of Kenya uses 4 gigawatts of energy at its peak. So there's more untapped energy available, and that we can build that and make access to it possible by building new energy. But how do we do that? So it turns out that Bitcoin is the answer here too. Bitcoin can be the financing tool as well as it can be the energy usage tool that makes it all possible. So how do we do this? We leverage a deflationary asset against an inflationary currency. By borrowing US dollars or any currency against our Bitcoin assets at market terms and using the US dollars to build tangible energy assets. Gridless Energy creates a financial reactor that produces both more energy and more Bitcoin over time. So I tried to visualize it for you. We can take a fiat investment and create a Bitcoin treasury, use multi-sig with a lender to get fiat out of that. With that fiat, build energy sites, which then of course makes more energy, and put that back into the treasury and pay back the lending. So the gridless model is to financially leverage a deflationary asset, Bitcoin, to build more of the key input, energy, for producing more of the deflationary asset, Bitcoin. Lather, rinse, repeat, all without ever selling a single Bitcoin. So Bitcoin financing unlocks this endless energy. It uses Bitcoin to finance new energy, uses Bitcoin mining to make energy profitable, and it uses Bitcoin as the market maker for price in those local communities. Why is that last one important? Because when you're in rural Africa, the price of power can be 30 cents per kilowatt to 90 cents per kilowatt. However, we know as Bitcoin miners that we get paid about 7 to 10 cents per kilowatt hour that we run a miner. So then if anybody's willing to spend 2 more cents than that, say 12 cents, they should get access to this power and we should be happy to sell it to them. So they get much cheaper electricity at half or more than half of their normal price, and we get to do mining when they turn their lights off. So all of a sudden, Bitcoin financing provides this unrivaled capital efficiency. So in our example here, I was saying, what does it take on the third one down, how many years to build 100 megawatts? And so if you had $20 million worth of Bitcoin, which is about 262 Bitcoin, you could build it, you could do that in 10 years' time. And this is our way of thinking about what you could do over that amount of time with which different amounts of money. But the really interesting way to think about it is this. In today's model of energy, 20 million builds you 10 megawatts of power. So it costs about $2 million to build 1 megawatt of run-of-river hydro. In 30 years, you'll still only have that 10 megawatts unless you go raise more money. In this Bitcoin financing reactor, $20 million converted into Bitcoin builds 100 megawatts in over a decade. And in 30 years, you'll build 1 to 4 gigawatts. So the key benefits of this is that there's real Bitcoin returns and you have this capital efficiency that you cannot get anywhere else. The final way I like to look at it is, and to show people, and this is going to be harder for you to see, is that the value of the Bitcoin is growing every year. As you're building 3 to 5 new energy sites every year, the value of Bitcoin is going from 20 to 27 to 35 to 50 to 66 million, and you have even more capital at your disposal to build more energy. So the economics and impact of using Bitcoin for financing of energy are unrivaled. And it's for Bitcoin, for energy, and for Africa. So for Bitcoin, it takes the decentralization of the mining network even further. So instead of having large 200 megawatt vertically integrated server farms, you now can have 50 sites across 15 countries that are all sub 5 megawatts. For energy, we can finally make off-grid energy profitable by creating a constellation of renewable mini-grids across the continent. It provides more electricity with a lot more reliability than centralized grids. And for Africa, we can finally put a dent in the number of 600 million Africans who still live without electricity. There is a near unlimited supply of energy to be developed in the one place on Earth that needs it most, Africa. And Bitcoin is what unlocks it. Thank you.